Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast, the #1 resource for learning what it means to have a healed heart, connect more deeply with Jesus, and experience true and lasting transformation in your life. I am one of your hosts, Melinda Wilson.
And I'm your other host, Cathy Little. Please hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the fresh content that we're continuing to release. And while you're at it, we greatly appreciate your help in getting the word out by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving us a quick review.
You can also keep up with us by following our social media by searching face-to-faceministries.org on Facebook, and that has no spaces, no numbers, and no caps, and on Instagram at face-to-face-min, and that is all one word.
Our team also offers one-on-one ministry sessions that can be done virtually. And one of our favorite things to do is to train others to do what we do in helping others connect with Jesus. So if you want information on that, we can help you out.
Yeah, and for more information about all the resources, including what Cathy's talking about, our trainings, our events that we offer, visit face-to-faceministries.org. And while you're there, please sign up for our newsletter.
All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, We're actually coming to you from the Portland, Oregon area, Columbia River Valley Gorge. If you are listening to this, you might want to hop into YouTube and catch the video. We're just giving a quick little update, little intro to our podcast this week. We're really excited about our guest, but we have been here. Why are we in Oregon?
We actually went to a conference this past weekend, and then we have Dash Away coming up in Tahoe next month, August 16th to the 18th.
There's only one room with 2 beds left. If you want to come,
snatch it up.
Almost sold out.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah, and our guest today, we got part 1 of a 2-part series with Josh Hoffert. We've interviewed him before, but Josh is actually really into the Desert Fathers, and he weaves that into inner healing as well. I think you're really going to enjoy it, so here we go with part 1. Well, Josh, we have not talked to you in a while, and it's been forever since we've been able to get something scheduled. This has been so crazy.
A long time coming.
You know, I think it must be the timing, because we were on a hiatus for a while we were doing some other things, building, we're doing a lot of training in the Emmanuel approach, which I know you're familiar with. And so we're just kind of getting back in the swing of things. And it took a while, like we just never got it going. And now we did. And even this morning, we've had some glitches trying to get this going. So there must be some really awesome gold you're about to share with us.
I hope so.
Oh my goodness.
Or the Lord was trying to tell us, don't do this.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? It has been so wild to try and get this thing off the ground here. But
yeah, that's right.
But I am really glad to have you back on the podcast, and really
it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, excited to hear about what you're doing. And I was reading through the introduction and forward and stuff of the book, and I'm seeing some themes there, how it's all about detaching from things so that you can attach to the right things. And so I'm excited about having that conversation with you today and learning more about that. But would you just reintroduce yourself to our listeners really quick, just a little bit of your background and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to. I'm a California boy that's circumvented the pretty much the whole landscape of the U.S. and Canada to move to little old Prince Edward Island. I don't think you can get further away. Well, I guess if you went to Newfoundland, you could get further away. That's it. And actually, we did last summer. We ended up in Newfoundland at the easternmost point of North America. That was pretty
cool.
So I moved to Canada in 2007 to intern with John Paul Jackson's Streams Ministries, and they had launched a base in Vancouver, and the head office at that point, the headquarters of the ministry was in New Hampshire, and eventually moved to Texas. And now a mutual friend of all of ours oversees that, right? John Thomas.
Yeah, John.
And he's a great guy.
Yeah.
And I've done lots of traveling with John, and anyway. And so I ran for a while the Canadian branch of Streams Ministries, doing lots of teaching and training on prophetic ministry, spiritual growth and maturity, dream interpretation, that kind of stuff. And after John Paul passed away, we eventually moved to the east coast of Canada. I was in Vancouver, British Columbia, west coast of Canada. We moved to east coast to Prince Edward Island, where Anne of Green Gables is famously set.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the happiest days I ever saw my wife was when we visited L.M. Montgomery's, or they call her Lucy Maud out here, is he visited her house. They have the Heritage House is still there, and you can walk through the setting of Anne of Green Gables and look at the Haunted Woods and Lover's Lane and all the places where she's set certain segments of the story. So my wife was just smiling all day long. I think it was, I don't know if it was the marriage or the day of our wedding or the day of Anne of Green Gables where she was happier. I'm not sure yet. And so we launched a ministry called Wind Ministries, and where we explore our interests, which are helping people recover themselves, grow in intimacy with God, encounter the Father's heart, hear his voice, and grow in healthy and vibrant ways and develop good, stable, healthy communities, and especially focused on helping leaders navigate the issues of the heart and drowning out all of the extra voices to hear the voice of God, and navigating the chaos and the wilderness of the desert of the heart, as it were. And so that's a lot of what we do. My wife does primarily, she's a stay-at-home mom who does homeschooling with our oldest. We have 3 kids, 11, and in 2 days, the middle will be 9, and then we have a 6-year-old. So she homeschools our oldest, and then she also is a Heart Sync facilitator,
cool.
Trained with Father Andy and through the Heart Sync guys, and is well connected with them. Yeah, so she does that kind of on the side, but her main project, homeschooling, is quite the endeavor. And actually, homeschooling wasn't a passion of ours. Our daughter was struggling with some of the relationships at school, and so it was just the wise thing to do. And anyway, so that's where we're at today.
Nothing but respect for parents who homeschool. I can't even imagine. Yeah. And
she was not a let's homeschool person. She was like, I think we need to do this because it'd be good for her emotional health, and it has been a huge difference.
I would imagine having them at home, you can be more intentional about building resilience and appreciation practices and helping them connect with Jesus at this tender young age. That's something that we're exploring as a ministry, is that context for connecting with Jesus in that profound way
100%
from a young age, rather than like, let's prevent the crash and burn when you hit 40 or 45. Let's
that's right,
get a good start and build that into them as youngins.
Yeah, that's right. That's amazing how many people, just story after story after story of pastors, leaders, and your average church attender just burning out dramatically. Nowadays, they call burnout the new epidemic, right?
Man, you're not kidding.
It's a thing, and that's one of the things when we look at. I was reading a book within the last year or so called The Burnout Epidemic by Jennifer Moss, and it's not a Christian book. She's a secular author studying the problems of burnout, and it was amazing when there's 6 particular factors that the WHO have said this is the definition of burnout, right? And I was looking at it going, man, if we just had good, healthy, thriving Christian communities, it would mitigate all 6 of these.
Yes.
It's amazing how the Christian church is set up to mitigate those things. Like, you're like, oh yeah, if that was there, if that was there, if that was there. And it's not so simple because we're human. And I can't remember who was it, Graham Cook, who said, if you found the perfect church, you probably shouldn't go there because you'd just mess it up. And
I would imagine he'd say something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like something he'd say.
Man.
So that's our heart, is to help people recover, return to that place of joy, which can be found in encountering the Father's heart. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a licensed family and marriage therapist in California. And he made a really good point where he's does actually one of his expertises, or his expertise, how do you say that plural word? I don't know. His expertise
Yeah.
is helping children who've come through traumatic experiences in the adoption process.
Oh man.
And so really niche, but very needed, right? And
Yeah.
he was saying that there's a big difference between having the tools to navigate stress and anxiety, and breathing exercises, ways of calming yourself down, things that people would do, distraction methods, this type of stuff. There's a big difference between the way that you can learn to deal with stress and anxiety, and kind of then find your baseline of living a normal, peaceful life, we'll say, and having the kind of peace that comes because you get the perspective of the Father on your life.
Yeah.
And those are two wildly different things, right? And so the approach to emotional maturity and the approach to emotional maturity from the Christian side and the secular side, they're looking to produce the same thing, the ability to be yourself in difficult circumstances. But the method of getting there is very different, and the outworking of that is very different.
Yeah.
And when we look at some of the early monastic movements in Christian history, like I love to study so much the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers being one in particular, you find some interesting practices that would lend themselves to that. So,
yeah, boy, something needs to change, because there's so much brokenness. There's so many people that are just faking it till they make it. They're flopping around through life without actually thriving, without having a true sense of belonging, without understanding who they truly are, without really being awakened to who they truly are, because they have all these externals that are messing with them and making life hard, and they don't really know who they are. Paul Young talks about the ontology and just the truth of your being and the way of your being. It's like we aren't living up to what's true about us, because we are, we're bumping into so much stuff. But
we've become very good in Western civilization at living in the realm of ideas and not in the realm of actual truth and the way that we're expressed on a day-to-day basis. So Jesus says, out of the heart proceeds all kinds of wicked and awful things, but no one's saying that about themselves, right? No one's going, well, I lied yesterday, but does that make me a liar? No one defines themselves that way, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going, I can actually, in the functional way the Western mind has been developed, I can actually convince myself I'm one way and live an entirely different way, because we have a whole system of thought that puts identity in the realm of the idea and not in the realm of the practical.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if I can love the people around me, I can still be a person of love because I've convinced myself. So I live this incongruous life that's full of cognitive dissonance. And so then anxiety goes because I'm trying to love someone, but I'm actually hating myself in doing it. And I destroy the relationships around me. I'm going, what happened? Well, the way you live and the way you are two different things.
Yeah.
And the way you think about yourself is very different from the way that you live. There's a lot of factors into that. And that's not just because we're a westernized society. There's reasons why that happens. But the reason why in my opinion, the reason why the anxiety has gone on so long is because we can convince ourselves we're one way and live a different way. So that's a byproduct of the Western mind.
Yeah.
Influenced by Greek philosophy, the logos and the ideas and the realm of Platonic philosophy, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the actual factors that produce maturity in an individual, they're not that complicated, realistically. They're just very difficult to you can't force them to happen. No one stumbles into maturity. Let's put it that way. It's really impossible to stumble into maturity. It's just that you find the right set of factors and it actually produces maturity. You just didn't realize that you stumbled into the right set of factors.
Oh man, that's so good.
That reminds me. Yeah,
so
it
true.
Reminds me, Josh, of Dr. Joe Dispenza, neuroscientist, said that we don't live by what we know, we live by what we believe. And so that whole cognitive dissonance thing. It's like, but I know these things, like the left hemisphere knowing, but the subconscious, what controls 95% of how we actually live. And it might be more than 95%. I don't know, those subconscious beliefs. And we think that we have all this knowledge about God or about life, about meditation, about health, about whatever, relationships. And we think that will help. Like you said, we can't stumble into maturity and healing just because we know these things. We're living out of what we truly believe. And so Josh, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this cognitive dissonance when you're finding yourself, why is this not working out? This is what I believe. This is what I know, or at least I think I do. I've been taught, but I'm not seeing that or experiencing that. So how do you integrate, or how do you recover from cognitive dissonance, or however you want to answer that? Like when
how about reprogramming it? Maybe.
And like when we start recognizing why is there a disconnect, what do we do with that?
Right. Yeah, and that's a great question. I think that's the way that we're asking the same question that humanity's asked for, however many millennia we've been around. We're just able to articulate it in different ways, right? How do we recover ourselves? And when we're essentially living a lie. And that's one of the things I write about in the introduction to the book, is that the retreat to the desert was about discovering the false self and putting it to death.
Yeah.
It wasn't about some romanticized version of trying to find a place of solitude so I can practice spiritual disciplines and then find God in the midst of it. It's no, I found God, and I'm realizing that I can't continue to find him here. And so I need to leave, in the sense of leaving the city. And I recognize that I'm confronted by temptation left, right, and center in the city. If I go to the desert, there's no way I can possibly placate my temptation. And so I'm forced to confront all of my frailty and all of my weakness. And this is the retreat to the desert. And the desert took on the character, or the understanding of the desert took on the character of the journey of the heart. The journey of the heart is confronting my forlornness and my brokenness. And that's a difficult thing for someone to look inside, because you never know what you're going to see. And lots of people use social media to placate or to self-medicate. They use anxiety to medicate. They use pills to medicate. They use drugs to medicate, alcohol to medicate. They use sex to medicate. They use all kinds of things to self-medicate, rather than look inside and find what's actually going on in there. It's amazing how many people refuse to realize, and it really is a refusal to realize, hey, I've had so many people I talk to diminish the trauma that happened to them when they were young. Like someone who's serially sexually abused and offered to other people. This stuff happens way more than you think it does. Serially sexually abused by someone in the family or whatever, minimizing the trauma. So, well, other people had it worse. Well, it doesn't matter what other people had. There's no scale for trauma. Trauma impacts each person individually and uniquely and separately.
Yeah.
I think it's, what's his name? Viktor Frankl talks about, it's kind of actually a grotesque analogy, because the guy was a Holocaust survivor. And he talks about the way that trauma and suffering, he calls it suffering, but trauma in that sense, fills the human soul is the same way gas fills a gas chamber. He uses the analogy, being a Holocaust survivor who spent time in Auschwitz, saying it doesn't matter how much gas you put in the chamber, it's going to expand to the entirety of the chamber. And trauma is the same way. It doesn't matter how much trauma you put in there, it's going to expand and fill the individual's being. And now recovering from that is a lifelong journey. And the refusal to actually recognize it or even admit that it exists or make excuses for its existence is like, you spend all your time lobbing spears at everybody else rather than looking and going, this happened to me and it wasn't okay.
Man.
And that's a hard thing for people to do.
Yeah.
But it's a necessary thing for people to do. And it's not fair, like life's not fair because people get dealt different cards. I grew up in a relatively peaceful home. My parents divorced when I was 18. And so I had a lot of things to work through because of that. But in the sense of having a stable environment, I grew up in a relatively stable environment before that time. And but my wife, her father was out of the picture when she was 4. And so her struggle with her lifelong struggle with the rejection of a father, and not like, for instance, one example of the way that impacts someone. My dad, I actually was talking to my dad earlier today. I have a great relationship with my dad, and that was a whole long journey in and of itself. We went to visit some friends in Texas a few years ago, and I called my dad up and said, "Hey," my dad lives in Florida. I said, "Hey, we're going to be in Texas, and it'd be great to see you." And my dad's like, "Oh yeah, I'll drive over he's in Pensacola. I'll drive over and come spend a couple of days with you." And I was like, "That's wonderful." And my wife's stunned when she hears this conversation, because she goes, "That's what dads do? They just go, I'll drive 10 hours to go visit my kids?" And because she doesn't know what she doesn't know, right? She's dealt a hand of cards where she's never seen what it looks like for a father to impact his children. And so when she sees it with my dad to me, she goes, "I never knew that's what a dad was like." Uh-huh. So she's dealt a hand of cards that significantly increases trauma in her life, because she's got the trauma of absence and the trauma of she had certain things happen in her childhood as well. That's her story to tell. But she's got trauma of neglect and trauma of intent. So you don't even know what you don't know. And it spends a whole lifetime unpacking all of that. So not everybody is dealt the same set of fair cards, right? And so the inner turn into the heart is, to some people, it's astronomically more difficult, because there's a lifetime of pain to deal with there and to look at there. So the first step is to acknowledge the degree of woundedness that we're carrying, and that we've been a recipient of deep wounds, and we've also been an instigator, because of our deep wounds, of deep wounds. And that's another layer that's difficult to come to grips with, is that I've hurt other people. Well, they rejected me, so I that's why I hurt them. Well, you still were the person that hurt them. If I reject others, that's because I have rejection within me. It's not because they've rejected me first. It's because I already have an inner wound that I'm responding to. So recovering yourself is not an easy endeavor. And I heard actually it was a Jordan Peterson quote recently, and he said it was genius. And he said, "The cost of life is death." That's the cost of life. Everyone's going to die. The cost of life is death. To live means you will die. I thought, my goodness, almost every day the cost of life is death. And Jesus lays this out, of course, when he talks about taking up your cross daily, that there's going to be a self-recovery every single day of your life. And again, it's not an easy thing to dive in and to see that. I know there's certain requirements, like I couldn't become the person and the man that I am today if I didn't have other people who are further ahead on the journey pouring into my life. I need that kind of input. I can't figure out, I can't do what I don't know what to do. I need to see other people do it to show me the model of what it looks like to love Jesus, to love my wife, to love my kids, and to walk forward in life. I need other people to do it. And sometimes we don't have that, and it's difficult. We can find that sometimes in reading the scriptures, and we see the life of Paul or David, who imploded his whole life but recovered in a God-oriented fashion, right? And we can see those kind of pictures when we read the stories, and they can help us in one sense. But I really need loving, supportive community, loving, supportive mothers and fathers that help channel my life in a God-directed way. And that's where we come, where in some sense the decline of the political influence of the church in the West is probably a good thing, because we can actually get back to just being a loving family and community. And, we're right in the middle of that tension right now. There's a lot of people want to make the church political, and I'm going, we just need to get away from this and get back to being a loving family and community who supports themselves. There's an interesting, just an aside to that, is in the 15th century, about 50 years before the Reformation, the Pope of the time commissioned a study to figure out why the church had lost its influence in the wider world. And when they came back a couple years later, and it was about a year or two before this Pope passed away, they found that the reason they had lost their influence in the world was because no one was willing to die for the teaching anymore. And they were filled with pomp, and they were filled with, there's the issue of indulgences and stuff like that happened with the Reformation. But 50 years before, the Catholic Church was looking at itself going, we screwed everything up because nobody cares about the actual message anymore. And you read his findings and you go, this seems pretty pertinent to today. And they tried self-reformation, but it never took because the priests were full of pomp. And it says, at one point it says, you love riding your horses with great flowing robes and your dogs following after you. And in criticizing the priests of the day. And 50 years later, you have Martin Luther stand up and say, this is wrong. And I sometimes I look at the church today and go, man, that's a prophetic insight if we've ever seen some, that our waning influences, you can't demand influence back. It's not the way it works. You don't go, we lost influence, so give us our voice back. It doesn't work that way. It's let's get back to the actual tenets of the gospel, which is living this life of tenderness, of love. It's interesting that when Paul, like you think about Paul's letter to Philemon, however you say his name, right? When he's talking about Philemon's runaway slave Onesimus, that when Paul sends the letter to Colossians, and he's talking about the stories of love that he's heard, like Paul says, the thing that he commends the church of Colossae in is that they love well. Not that they have right doctrine, not that they have right practice, not that they have good teaching, not that they have good leadership styles. His thing is, the gospel has taken root in you because of the love that I hear about. And the reason why the letter to Philemon is really important in that is because Paul's practical display of love, imagine he sends Onesimus back to Philemon and says, treat Onesimus as if he's me. Like, that's crazy, right? Onesimus he's run off from Philemon. He's an indentured servant, essentially. He's probably stolen money. At the very least, he's left him bereft of the kind of things he needed to run his business in his house. And so in that day, Onesimus is deserving of the worst kind of punishment. So for Paul to send him back and say, treat him as if I'm with you. So Paul's expectation of Philemon is not, well, just kind of forgive him in your head and never talk to him again. Paul's expectation of Philemon is that this is going to be a complete restoration of the relationship and actually a transformation of the relationship. And this is what he means when he's saying the gospel has taken root in you and it's now flowering to this beautiful display of love, which includes forgiveness, humility, tenderness, looking like Jesus, all this stuff. And the ask that he's given to Philemon is, it's like, in a way, it's almost like if Paul was to say, hey, it's the employee that stole all of your money and ran out on you and then launched their own business and tried to undermine you, welcome him back as if I'm with you. It's like, what are you asking, Paul?
Yeah.
His ask of the gospel is actually incredibly high. And, we're like, forgiveness starts in releasing the person and not seeing them ever again. We're kind of like, we've watered it down. And, but those are difficult things and we've got to start somewhere. But the actual display of the Christian community should be this vibrant picture of the person of Jesus and all of his tenderness, love, affection. One of the things my friends and I like to say when it comes to how we relate to each other and some of the leadership training that we do is that, and I've just really taken this to the heart. It's that affection is greater than agreement, alignment, and assignment. And we've got these kind of communal guidelines or leadership networks or apostolic networks that are all about our agreement, our alignment, or our assignment. And as soon as we start to question anything, our relationships are lost because they're not based on affection for one another. if my relationship is based on affection for one another, we can have different assignments and still walk together. If it's based on affection, we can have a disagreement on practical doctrine, and like, church should start at 10 or 10:30, or you should preach this way or this way, whatever. But these kind of things, because agreement dominates our relationships, we don't know how to relate to one another. And so we have any friction, and we'd end up turning into 5-year-olds, and we're no better than the politicians that run our countries. And it's like, why would anybody listen to us when that's the case?
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful in looking at the decline of political influence in the church, because it means, on some level, it could mean a return to loving Christian communities that are supporting one another, taking care of the poor, feeding the sick, taking care of the widows and the orphans in our midst, because there's lots of people that are orphaned from their own families just because they're not practically an orphan, or they're widowed even in their own marriages. They're not supported by their husband or wife. And so there's lots of practical, hands-on loving family community stuff right in front of us that we can get to the business of doing. And that's a when it comes to recovering from pain and trauma and woundedness, that's a significant part about it. And that's actually one of the things you see in the monastic movements in church history is almost it doesn't seem to be intentional. Maybe there's certain ones that it was intentional with, but family and belonging sprouted up around certain individuals and certain characters, like Anthony the Great, the first great monastic movement in the Desert Fathers, right? He goes into the desert, and all of a sudden people start coming to him because he has wisdom, because he has what it seems like spiritual potency. When he prays, things happen. When I ask him a question, he gives me good, solid advice. And so people come to him because of his example, and because he was so humble and tender and caring and affectionate. And so all these men and women start congregating in the desert around Anthony the Great, and a family develops because they're inspired by a person who walks in humility and tenderness. And it's like, wow, if we got back to that would be a pretty cool thing.
Stay tuned for part 2.
You're going to love it. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. This is a listener-supported podcast, and if you have received value in any way from our content, we would truly appreciate you to partner with us financially, and you can do that by going to our website, facetofaceministries.org/give for tax-deductible giving. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.